because some of these thugs they weren't only thugs, they were some of the guys who worked in the pyramid area who were sort of fooled into coming. They were told that, you know, 1.5 million tourists left the country. You guys are out of jobs. You know why? Because these spoiled rich kids in Tahrir Square who are, you know, running this vigil. Because they want more and more and more and more, and the president gave them everything. These guys they were agents, they were trained by the United States, by Israel, by Qatar, by Saudi Arabia, by Iran, by Hezbollah, basically everybody who's opposite of everybody. They threw everything in the kitchen sink at them. And so they charged them up, they told them there were 200 people, so you could see them smiling as they're riding the camels and the horses, sort of coming into Tahrir, thinking this was going to be a walk in the park, and they had the green light from the government to basically just slap people around and get paid for it. So they came in with their, you know, testosterone-induced, you know, well, we're going to have a fun time, but the people put up this amazing fight, and it was amazing that it was tragic. I mean, it lasted 27 hours. After this first group, there were reinforcements sent later through the night of hundreds more of the paid thugs, and the people that were doing the sit-ins, you know, ordinary people, stood their ground and fought back. And they weren't just youth. They were, first of all, men and women, boys and girls. Some of them were families, some were middle-aged, some were, you know, a little older, and everybody stood their ground. And what made it even more surreal was that it was being filmed the whole time. And it was surreal because everybody knew this was happening, and the government knew as well, and it surprises the government that the government knew that we knew, but it still did nothing. And that we could do nothing. And so basically it was all in the hands of the people that were there. And even on live television at 10 p.m. that night, and up until midnight, there were calls from some of the well-known journalists who had taken sides with the revolution, saying to the host, and these are like, this is a host like Oprah or you know, Charlie Rose, I mean, between the, you know, the talking heads and the social talk shows, very well watched. We have information that there's going to be a massacre at around dawn in Tahrir Square. We beseech, we appeal to the government to do something about it. And the host, again, would be, you know, this is too weird to be true. So you would question, you know, the journalist, and you say, no, we have this information. Well, if the government knew, obviously, to do something about it. But anyway, we appeal to the government to listen to this man or woman. And sure enough, at around dawn, the images on television turned even more brutal, and it became, you know, fireballs just flying all over the place in Tahrir Square. I mean, Tahrir Square, the square that every Egyptian knew to be peaceful and to be, you know, a place where you run your bureaucracy, change your passport, take a walk in one of the parks, visit a museum. It was very weird and surreal for all of us to watch. It just became like a foreign land. And it continued until the next day, and the Prime Minister came out and said, I'm aware of what happened and I will investigate. But he was saying this while it was still happening. He hadn't even stopped it. He was talking about investigating. And that's why that one Prime Minister lost all credibility with the revolutionaries. In any case, it was because of the bravery and courage and you know, sustainability of the people who were in Tahrir Square. They would break the pavement with their fists to make rocks to fight back with. They would be hit with Molotov cocktails, which are basically soda bottles with a little bit of gasoline and a string that would be lit up and then thrown at someone. It would become like a bomb, like, you know, small blast. They try to catch them, fill them up, and throw them back. You know, if they fought with a group of people and, you know, claimed a knife or a sword or whatever, a sling or whatever, they would use that. So they had nothing. They were not prepared, and still they were able to withstand through a lot of casualties. Both wounded and dead. I think there was 60 or more dead and 1,500 or maybe 2,500, I forget the number, that were injured. Later, one of the doctors that was there on the scene said that he treated one of the guys 4 times. Each time he would come and he would patch him up, he'd bolt right back into the field. A little later he'd come back with a different injury, patch him up, bolt right back, 4 times. The 5th time he saw him, he had a bullet through his head and he was killed. He was 13 years old. So, you know, people now are hearing these stories, and they were seeing but wait a second, these are not foreign agents. These are not spoiled kids who are, are asking for something that is beyond the pale. These were Egyptian. These were good Egyptians, willing to give up their lives for the rest of us. And so this became a transformative moment. While Mubarak's speech the night before had almost lost the revolution, this misstep by the cronies of Mubarak claimed it back for the people. And so the next day, you saw Tahrir Square blossom from the 15,000 to the 500,000 that never left until he resigned. It became millions of days. And so the Tahrir Square, what I call the Tahrir Republic, because it's more than a square, it's the makings of a new nation. Everything changed. Everything that was Egyptian changed, perhaps not changed, but reclaimed. Perhaps these things were there already, but they had been sort of corrupted or contaminated, and now they were being purified again. People had been complaining about the frivolous nature of the youth. They listened to music, they played PlayStation, they smoked pot, they party, they're not interested in intellectual or political or anything of value. That same generation was there leading, was there planning, was there fighting, was there believing in higher causes like freedom and democracy and social justice and making it happen in a way other generations never did. There was talk of how the youth were becoming more emblazoned, and there was sort of the sexual harassment of girls in the streets and in public areas. In Tahrir Square, very few cases of any. People were again respectful of each other. The sort of lackadaisical approach to order and cleanliness, where people would just dump garbage in the streets in Cairo, lost its status as one of the top 5 most beautiful cities in the world in around the 20s or 30s to essentially an exhausted looking, polluted, pretty much lacking in beauty type of city. In Tahrir Square, you had groups of young people with gloves and garbage bags walking around cleaning up, and you had millions in that square. And despite the large congestion of people, the concentration, it was one of the cleanest spots in Cairo. And even with the lack of security, and 2 things happened that night that we claimed Tahrir Square for the first time, the 28th. One was that the police was withdrawn from the streets, creating a security vacuum in the country, and 2, the military was brought down into the streets. The military, that was a sign or sort of a signal that there was a revolution. So the first military car that zoomed into Tahrir Square that night, everybody cheered because they knew that the revolution had more or less succeeded. And the withdrawal of the police remains a mystery to this day. I mean, the fact that there was some trouble in parts of the country, why would anybody withdraw the entire police force? And moreover, we heard of prisons being opened up and up to 17,000 criminals escaped. So again, it turns out that there was this, after failing to prevent the revolution through cutting mass communication and sabotaging it through the thugs, etc., the government, forever inclined to corrupt means in dealing with the people, doing everything but what is right, thought that they could just create a security vacuum, bring thugs and thieves into the streets and criminals. People would get busy protecting their neighborhoods. They'd have to leave Tahrir Square. They'd have to stop their political activity. They'd come back and reclaim the country. But that did not happen. Instead, rather than people take advantage, and you had your occasional thugs, you had your career thugs take advantage, and you had your paid thugs do the same, but largely speaking, something incredible happened, and that is the great overwhelming majority of Egyptians, rather than take advantage of the situation, to plunder and loot and do whatever their heart desired, started to organically and spontaneously organize into neighborhood watch groups. And it happened not just in one street or in one quarter or in one neighborhood, but in every one of them and in every city in Egypt. And it boggled my mind. And the way it happened was a group of neighbors would come down, they'd take shifts in the streets, they'd find a way to identify each other. All right, this group is going to wear armbands, the other group decides to pull up one sleeve, whatever it is. And as they walk by through the streets, that hit on the lamppost twice, that they know, okay, this guy's is not an intruder. They put blockades up in every street in the neighborhood, and as cars would come in, they'd check them out. So they took the role of the police, protecting their neighborhoods against the thugs. Still, people were in Tahrir. And, if a car would pass by, and I joined these neighborhood watch groups and participated in that as well. And so if a car would pass through and we would check the car, open the trunk, can I see your ID, et cetera, our group would pull up the windshield wipers so that as the car went through the second security point, or security checkpoint, they would, all right, keep going, you're good. And he wouldn't know why. Somebody else would say, just tell the next guy good morning, and this would be at night. They'd say good morning, like, you're good, go. It's sort of like a password. So there's all of these, again, spontaneous little things that were coming up that the people were doing to regain security themselves. And so it occurred to everybody that we didn't need the police. We didn't need this government in any way. The people, united, will never be divided. The people can claim the streets back with vision, with creativity, with unity. That was the key, and that new spirit was born. That is what I refer to as Tahrir Square. All of these stereotypes that even Egyptians had believed about themselves after decades of being talked down to and being told that you're not ready for democracy, that we're poor, that we're uneducated, that we have all of these God-given barriers to success and progress and development. So we do what we can, but our hands are tied. People began to break the shackles that were tying these hands and to believe in their ability, that they were the only resource necessary to build up another civilization once again. And that was through their morals, through their values, through their cultural values of unity, neighborliness, working together. I tell you, if you needed something as you were marching in any of these protests or standing in Tahrir Square, marching and demonstrating, before you could articulate it, somebody would come and help you out. If you looked thirsty, somebody would offer you water. If you were looking around, somebody asked you, what are you looking for? If you had something in your hand looking for a place to throw it, somebody would walk in with a garbage bag. So there was this, proactivity from the people. If somebody got injured, he wouldn't have to say help. 10, 15 people would rush and pick him up and start calling for first aid, and is there a doctor, et cetera, et cetera. So that was really what struck me as very unique and wonderful about the spirit of the people of this revolution. Now, also global stereotypes that we have here in the United States and in the West about that part of the world. If 9/11 was a milestone, a historical milestone, and we refer to the pre-9/11 world and the post-9/11 world, the world after 9/11, and we talk about the rift between civilizations, between East and West, and there's this cottage industry of misunderstanding and in many ways stereotyping and Islamophobia that has been built, on the backs of the genuine grief and fear of what happened on 9/11 that's been exploited by certain agenda-driven polemicists. Those stereotypes that were built as a result of that, we're now talking about a January 25th world, a pre-January 25th and a post-January 25th. A lot of these stereotypes were devastated. If there was a wall built as a result of 9/11, that the revolutions we're seeing now, particularly the Egyptian one, if it didn't bring down that wall, it put a huge crack through it. The stereotype that the Arab world, the Muslim world, is forever stuck between dictatorship on one end and an Islamist, extremist theocracy on the other, has been defeated. And not defeated by a military coup, not defeated by a foreign export of democracy as we tried to do in Iraq, and not defeated by the single, shining knight on a white steed, the single Nasser figure or Salah ad-Din figure, but by the masses, by the people who said there is a third alternative and it's called democracy, and that is what we want. The stereotype that there is intolerance between religions, that there is an inherent intolerance between Muslims and Christians in the Muslim majority world, was again defeated. We saw in Tahrir Square priests and imams chanting and holding hands. We saw a mass, Christian mass, that was held in Tahrir on Friday, the Sabbath of Muslims, that was organized by the Muslim Brotherhood. And the organizers received an award at the Anglican Church the next day for their interfaith outreach. And as they prayed, again, after the camel incident, Tahrir Square was revitalized. It was a new sort of period for Tahrir Square. Now you had checkpoints, everything was organized, there were a lot more people, and everything was sort of protected by volunteers. The mass was surrounded by Muslim security, volunteer security. And when we prayed the Friday prayer, and our faces are to the ground and we're in a vulnerable position, again, the Christians surrounded us with protection. The third stereotype, the stereotype that females or women are secondary citizens in the Arab world or the Muslim world, was again seriously challenged. You saw, and I saw, female leadership, not just in the streets, and that was the case. I mean, multiple times it was a woman that would be chanting, and we would be chanting after her. And it wasn't just in the chants or in the, first aid help. It wasn't just a Florence Nightingale situation. It was in the battles. They were there. They were there breaking the pavement and carrying the rocks and fighting back. They were there in the camel incident in Tahrir Square. They were there in the first lines of January 28th, the Day of Rage, and they were there in the youth groups that were organizing parts and parcels of this revolution. In every group that I visited, I saw female leadership. So, as I was witnessing all this, and I don't count myself as part American, part Egyptian. I'm not 50% this, 50% that, or 75% this, 25% that. I see myself as 100% of each. I'm a 200% person. I'm truly bicultural. That's the way I feel. I come into the United States, it's like those adapters, the 110 or 220, you just flip a switch. I can be here and I can relate to everybody, and I feel this is my country, this is my culture, and I'm there and I feel the exact same thing. And so I flip the switch once in a while, and I'm there in my Egyptian mode. I'd flip and I'd be in my American mode and be like, wow, if only my fellow Americans could see what I was singing, how that would change a lot of perceptions, a lot of the misperceptions about that part of the world. And I say that a lot here about people there. In any case, to make the revolution, there's so much that could be said, and I want to sort of make a few pointers before we turn into questions and answers. Basically, during the period of the revolution itself, which was the marches, the storming of public squares, claiming them, especially Tahrir Square, and then the second phase, the Tahrir Republic, as I call it. And at that point, it was the flags, it was the tents that were set up, people slept there day in, day out. You had the makeshift hospital, you had the people that were bringing in food, blankets, everything that was needed. It became almost like Christiana. I don't know if you've been to Copenhagen, Denmark, that settlement it's been called its own republic within Denmark. Anyway, it had that feel, like it was just the People's Republic within the city, within the country. And after that phase, it continued to push for the same demand, which is, we're not going to compromise at this point. We've lost people. People have died. Blood has been shed. We paid the blood price for freedom. There's no compromise. Mubarak has to go. His regime has to go. And it still seemed like asking a lot. Because again, nobody could have imagined even the demand could be made just a couple weeks ago. But sure enough, he kept on pushing and persisting. On a Thursday, the military came out with a release, an announcement called Announcement Number 1 in military code, that we have good news for the people tonight. And everybody thought this meant that he was going to resign. So I went to the hairdresser, got a haircut, and got all ready to go back to Tahrir and celebrate and everything. And we waited for the speech. As always, he was late. No regard for the people. Came on and gave us this long-winded speech, 50,000 words, and not the word we wanted to hear, the single word, goodbye. That's the only word we were hearing for, listening for. Kept yapping, going on and on. People were just getting frustrated, looking at each other. Is this guy leaving or not? And then at some point, when they realized, okay, he's just going to yap all night, they started throwing their shoes at the big screen in Tahrir Square. And at that point, people were really angry. And a group of us, 3,000, decided to march to his palace in Heliopolis, which is about 20 miles away. So they did that. And a lot of people were saying, don't do that, because the presidential guard, they don't mess around. They just shoot. I mean, these are the orders. But they still went. That's how determined they were. So they ended up going there, and then it was sort of one of those humorous scenes of the revolution, and I guess very unique to the Egyptian people. But the presidential guard, when they saw them, they're like, who are you here for? What are you here for? They're like, we're here for the president. They're like, he's not home, he's actually out of town. It's a serious conversation. They're like, so you guys can set camp here, we're not gonna hurt you, but don't mess around, don't be violent. So, they started shaking hands, kissing, we're on the same side type of thing, the flowery language, and so they sat down and basically until the next day. Now, we were wondering what was going on. I mean, clearly the guy had to leave. Something was going on. Obama said he was going to leave. The CIA said he was going to leave. The military indicated he was going to leave. A lot of our pundits said he was going to leave. And even I said that on my blog. I said he was going to leave. But he didn't leave. So it occurred to all of us that basically what had happened was there was a rift in the powers that be, in the military that was about to take control. Omar Suleiman, who was his deputy, that was appointed by him late in the game, and some of the ministers of the cabinet that were part of the old guard, and that it appeared to us the military was getting frustrated, losing patience. You got to go now. People are in the streets, they're not leaving. It's a dangerous situation. We don't want a bloodbath. We're not going to shoot again, a single bullet at the people. And that is something that I have to give the Egyptian military credit for. At no point in history, this is something again unique to the Egyptian people's relationship with the military in the Middle East. Never has the Egyptian military fired a single bullet at the Egyptian people at any point in time. Now, the same is not true for Syria, for Turkey, for Libya, for Algeria, And so we had that assurance in our calculations. And we knew that was part of the debate up there, is that the military was getting frustrated. We're not going to shoot at them. They're not leaving. You got to go. And it was only because of the pressure of the people. But at the same time, the powers that be, the cronies and everybody would give us one more chance. So apparently that is what happened. And so in the final moment, they made a compromise where Gamal Mubarak, Mubarak's son, and the minister of Alum, media, basically kind of put together this quick speech through a montage where he was going for this one final push, trying to do what he did the other day, where he basically kind of, harped on people's emotions, and I'm one of you, I got you, I understand you. Same thing the Tunisian president said before he was out of his way, so it was a good premonition, a good omen for us. It was the I understand you speech, the final breath. So he basically came out and again talked forever and didn't say anything. But we knew that meant all we needed to do as a people's movement was to just push. We knew that Friday could be key. So we came out in larger numbers than any other day. We filled Tahrir Square like no tomorrow, with the flags and the chants and everything else. And at around 4 p.m., a large group of us started marching to the presidential palace to join the other group that was there from the night before. And again, it took us about a couple of hours. And we got there at around sunset. We prayed Maghrib, which is the sunset prayer. And no sooner had we finished, and we're just sitting there around the tram lines and in the streets around the presidential palace with the flags and everything else, when everybody just erupted in a massive cheer. Apparently, the time it takes for people that, in the homes watching television to hear the word, he resigned, and to dial a phone number and to say he resigned was exactly the same for everybody, because it was just a spontaneous, coordinated cheer. And I knew what had happened. So I was talking to this random guy, and he ended up the guy that I was basically making out with. Well, not quite. We're hugging because just so excited, and everybody was just hugs and kisses and high fives and cheers and dances, and it was like a euphoric experience. And it occurred to me that it was, as powerful as it was kind of nostalgic, and it occurred to me that it reminded me of the day in Grant Park when Obama had won for me. I had a similar euphoric experience that sort of didn't really deliver. But back then, that's how excited I was. And Obama coming to power, and with the promise that he had as a candidate. I'm not going to get into what I think of Obama now, but we felt the same way about Mubarak leaving, that it could be a new day, it could be a new era. And that's why we were so excited. And the media came into the streets and started interviewing people. There were fireworks. I don't know where they had the fireworks. Apparently they were there just in case, all over the place. And the cars honking and the big flags and everything else. And that everybody was in the streets at that point. It was the biggest party on earth. I mean, even the ones that weren't there before. And I had mixed feelings. And I was thinking, had you guys been there from the beginning, this could have happened at 1/3 of the time. But we're not going to hold anybody accountable. Let's just celebrate it. So anyway, that sort of ended that phase. And during that phase, from the 25th until February 11th, I had been doing three things: protesting, blogging, and my blog had sort of been one of the blogs that were read by a lot of people back home, and running interviews with CNN, Fox, BBC, WGN, whatever. And basically, I must have done 55 interviews in a period of 18 days. These were the three things I was doing. And then when he resigned, I started to focus my attention now on building relationships and networks with these youth groups, with the youth leaders, whom I had known little about up until that point. I had been sort of a lone wolf, solitary soldier. And so I basically, asked around, and in Cairo, if you ask, you never get lost. You descended into this neighborhood called Talat Harb, which was not far from Tahrir Square. And on Mahmoud Bassiouni Street, and ironically, Mahmoud Bassiouni Street, which happened to be the headquarters for these youth movements, is named after Mahmoud Bassiouni, who happens to be the grandfather of my mentor, Egyptian-American professor Sheikh Bassiouni, whom I had been calling almost every day, and whose office is across the street from my office in the Loop in Chicago, who himself, this grandfather, was a revolutionary in Egypt in 1919, the last revolution that we had. So when I told him that, it tickled him funny that his father's or his grandfather's street was the headquarters of the revolution. And there was basically three spots. There was this apartment, there was kind of a buzz with activity and all different kind of activists working together. There was the place called the Atelier, or French for the salon, the art salon, and it was a place where there was basically an art sort of display, but also people playing music and artists hanging out and talking, and writers and thinkers and intellectuals, etc. Coffee being served and drinks, etc. And further down the street there was sort of an underground cafe, even though it was elevated, called After 8. That was actually its name in Arabic. After 8. I'm not translating, that was the name. After 8. Even though it was more like after 2 a.m. because everybody was just there forever. But anyway, that was sort of the scene where I spent the next couple of weeks, and that's where I made a lot of my connections, and I worked my way through. At that point, I got to know that, let's say I'm sitting with a group, and they're one of the coalitions that were, moving things along. You sit with them, as I did, and you think to yourself, these guys have known each other since forever. And as the conversation progresses, oh, no, I just got to know this guy 2 days ago. Yeah, this girl, no, we got to know each other 4 days ago in Tahrir Square. So it was amazing that a lot of these relationships that were now being institutionalized and systemized into political units out of Tahrir Square were happening spontaneously based on merit in Tahrir Square. Who was doing what and how much they were doing it, and who's saying that, this is the go-to person, etc. And the other thing I noticed is that they came from different political currents. So it wasn't like the Muslim Brotherhood was coalescing here, the leftists were coalescing there, the liberals were here, whoever was there. It was more like there are 10 groups, and each of them had Muslim Brotherhood, left, liberal, and otherwise. Each one of them. So they weren't coalescing around political currents or ideologies, but rather around the people that they got to work with in Tahrir Square or whatever part of town they were organizing spontaneously or organically. So that's why I say it's not an ideological revolution. Everybody agreed on the anti-corruption, on the accountability, on the transparency, on social justice, on fairness, on the dignity and freedom of Egyptians. And those are all values. These are not ideologies, these are human values. That's the pan-Arab humanism I'm talking about. And that's what's developing in the streets right now. What's happening now is that these different groups are trying to learn through trial and error, as well as other means, how to work within that frame and yet be political. How to translate that into a political reality. That's what we're seeing happening, and it's very exciting to watch it develop. One guy, Gihad, he sort of became a legend of sorts in Tahrir Square. This guy was a DJ. He was an audio producer for Haifat Wahbi and Alissa and all of these divas. And the revolution came around, and this guy was as political. He was Che Guevara. He was talking all of the politics and all of the slogans, moving the people. He was up all night. People really respected him, and he could talk to the wealthy and the poor, to the Ikhwan, to the Muslim Brotherhood, and the leftists and the liberal, and he could talk to everybody. So Gihad was really a key figure. And then I kept working my way up, and I got to the group that had, and I'll close with this, that had put together that 21st group that I talked about on the first day. And that was a coalition composed of the youth ranks of 5 opposition groups. One was April 6th, which was one of the key groups that was formed in 2008, April 6th, 2008, when there were labor riots and there was police brutality, and they were formulated to respond to that and to raise awareness to that. A group called Dignity, Karama, a group called Al-Khad Tomorrow, a group called Baradai for Change. Baradai, the atomic agency former head and Nobel Prize winner, was really a force, an intellectual force for this revolution. So the youth of his movement were part of this, and the 5th group was the Muslim Brotherhood, the youth of the Muslim Brotherhood. So all 5 youth groups together formed this revolutionary youth coalition, and they were the ones that met in the apartment of one of them, who was a leftist, and planned all of, this 21st group on the 25th of January. But they didn't plan the revolution. They planned the protest that helped make the revolution. But the revolution, as final headlines, was basically sparked by the youth, helped and propelled forward by the ingenuity and creativity and organization of the youth, who were talking to organizers in Serbia on civil disobedience, how it worked in Serbia. They were talking to organizers in Tunis. They had the Facebook, they had the Twitter, they had everything else that was modern at their disposal. But then it was about the masses awakening. The masses awakening, and people ask me, so would you call this a Facebook revolution? My answer is no. As sexy as that sounds for a Western audience, I'm sorry to disappoint. No, it's not a Facebook revolution, because if you call it a Facebook revolution, you're talking about the tool. And you don't headline a revolution by the tool, you headline a revolution by its motivation. The motivation was dignity, freedom, social justice, anti-corruption. Again, the human values. It's a human value revolution, aided and assisted by social technology in the form of Facebook and everything else. But the motivation, nobody had to bring somebody else and say, hey man, we're going on the 25th, here's why. Everybody had the reasons within them. They've had it for decades. I even say that this revolution was 7,000 years in the making. It basically was a culmination of these centuries of Egyptian experience, into this climax moment of, for the first time ever, claiming back the streets. And so, at this point, I'm in touch with these youth leaders, I'm in touch with the organizers on the ground. The very last week I decided to produce a documentary, so with some friends back home, Jeremiah, Lorian, Yasser Laith, a bunch of guys came into Cairo. We spent the last 10 days in a few cars just jumping around, going everywhere. We talked to the top director in the country, Khaled Youssef, the top actor, Ahmed Rehab, the top athlete, Nader Said. We talked to the youth leaders, we talked to people in the streets. We filmed Tahrir, everything, the whole 9 yards, and we're trying to capture what I felt and what they felt in that week of the human face of this revolution and sort of make it into a documentary. So hopefully by June we'll be able to release something. Anyway, that's been my experience in Egypt for the revolution. I hope you were able to see an insider's perspective. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think Ahmed has a bunch of pictures that he'd like to share with us, so I probably would like to do that. And in parallel, we'll also open it up for questions and answers. There are going to be 2 mics going around, so if you'd like just to please, if you have any questions, please just make us know, let us know, and we'll have a mic going to your direction.
Rehab, what is your estimate of the probability that this jewel of a revolution is going to be hijacked by another dictator in the future?
If you had asked me this question at different points in time in the last month, you would have gotten different answers. At this point in time, I'm confident it will not be hijacked. Because we've reached a point of no return. The people have claimed the future, they've claimed the streets, they've claimed the beat of what is Egypt, the definition of what is Egypt. They can go back in Tahrir at a flip of a dime, and it's the same scenario all over again. Anybody that comes ought to know that, I think will know that. Even the military knows that as well. And here's why. They've shed blood. For those who haven't died, and I know how Egyptians think, they're going to say, those who died are not better than me. I'm willing to give up my life too. I actually wouldn't mind the chance. So when you have nothing to fear, you can't be broken.
There's a question back there.
I have to see.
Ahmed, first of all, we're all proud of what you guys accomplished. So congratulations. And my question is, you started, or this movement started for the purpose of, there were minor goals at the beginning. At what point do you think the demands started escalating and reached to changing the regime? When did that happen?
That's a very good question. You're right, they started with the 5 demands that I mentioned. And every time what seemed to be reasonable demands were met with what seemed to be extremely unreasonable apathy, the people escalated. Now, this apathy was very eerily familiar. It's the kind of apathy that people had experienced in bureaucracy, from the government, in almost every way over the past decades. You know, this dismissive attitude. So it was kind of like a challenge, you know, and people were making these claims. Here's what we get back. We're going to up the ante, and we're going to see who's going to run out of breath first. So it sort of became this confrontational chess game, and people were willing to go all the way, in my opinion, from the very beginning, but they were taking it step by step. And if anything, the government's lack of responsiveness helped propel the revolution for that reason.
First of all, thank you very much. It clarified a lot what was happening. I was following it on the radio, but many of the journalists that we were able to hear here weren't not clear on what was going on at the time. You mentioned at the beginning that this has implications for the rest of the Arab world. What type of implications were you thinking of?
When Tunisia happened, it took a lot of people by surprise. There wasn't that much of a spotlight on the details of what happened in Tunisia. And with all due respect to Tunisia, it doesn't have the same brand globally that a country like Egypt does. Having said that, Tunisia, especially in Egypt, is recognized as the spark. And right now, Tunisian capital is sky high in Egypt. But when things happened in Egypt and the whole world was watching, and it happened in sort of dramatic, sensational style. I mean, a lot of the things that we were witnessing, whether it was in Tahrir or in the storming of Tahrir, or even just in the daily interactions, were almost made for Hollywood. You couldn't. They were difficult to replicate in a sort of a drama film. They were so dramatic and people were watching all of that day by day. So, and so were the other Arabs. Al Jazeera was playing a phenomenal role. I mean, Egyptian media, state media, was shameless throughout this revolution. They would bring paid actors to say that, they were part of the revolution, and now they're admitting that they are paid agents. They received $500. They were trained in the USA, and they're so ashamed of what they've done. And most people, as you probably reacting now in your heads, this is ridiculous. Most people would see it as ridiculous, right? It was nothing but the government, embarrassing itself. But that's what the state media was doing. This old guard, rotting way of thinking that nobody was buying at all. Never did, really. But Al Jazeera was there, carrying live footage. They were there marching with those guys that marched in the night between Thursday and Friday to the presidential palace, step by step all the way. There were some international reporters as well before the pro-Mubarak thugs attacked them and tried to intimidate them so they would just leave the country. And the Arab response, again, you have to understand the Egyptian historical relevance to the region. Its leadership. It's a leader in the region, and perhaps in the last decade or so, it's been a disappointment to a lot of the other Arabs, the Egyptians themselves, because of the weakening of its leadership. But the moment it was reclaimed, I dare say the Arab countries were as proud and as happy as the Egyptian people were that Egypt had sort of come back. And that's why the next day in Libya, February 12th, you see, again, the bug, the freedom bug spread in Yemen, in Bahrain. It was all around the same time. In Algeria, even though that was foiled. And it's going to continue. I don't think it's going to end anytime soon. I think just as the military, post-colonial Arab socialism began in Egypt and sort of spread, not spontaneously, but engineered and assisted by Nasser, who was a strongman in the region, you're going to see the same spread, but this time more organically. And this time of pan-Arab humanism.
Yeah, I was wondering what's going on there right now. Are people returning to their normal routines of life? And how is the revolutionary spirit being kept alive?
There are definitely challenges right now. There have been challenges all the way through, and the challenges remain right now. Some of the challenges are basically that this is an emerging democracy. It's coming from within. It's being born organically from within. It's a trial and error process. People seem to be learning quite fast, but they're making mistakes. And I'm glad that they are, because if any of you ever learned anything, you know that when you make a mistake, you learn better than if somebody just tells you, this is wrong, this is right, here's your little manual, go run and do this thing. And so what we're seeing right now, for example, is that sometimes there's overdrive, where every group wants to carry its own mini revolution. We're seeing within the medical or the engineering syndicates, or the teaching syndicates, or here's a female, women's rights thing, here's the Coptic rights thing, here's the Muslim rights thing, and people are just coming out and they have this revolutionary bug. And to me, what made the revolution succeed is that it was united single, and it was about the common, the underlying values that would transfer to everything else if done right. But now you have a little bit of short-sightedness where some groups are coming out and wanting to grab what they can. So that's one of the challenges. But again, you have people pushing right back, saying the things I'm saying on national TV, saying, guys, we got to cool it, we got to be united, we got to look at the larger picture, things will happen organically. So you're seeing all of that. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of debate. People are no longer talking about football, which at one point was the opium of the people. That's all they ever talked about. And by the way, I have this theory that football helped the revolution. It was because of football that people knew the taste of what it was like to gather in the streets with flags and to feel the sense of patriotism. Egypt had been winning all of these African nation cups, and that swell of euphoria in the streets, people felt it, and this time they claimed it back, but in a political context, the first time that they did that. There's the challenge of foreign intervention, but not militarily, but through misplaced diplomacy, and particularly the United States. There is the challenge of the military, although I think increasingly that's less of a challenge. I'm seeing the military make all the right moves. So basically, these are some of the challenges that are there, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to go in the right direction. It's just going to be a matter of time.
I'm also very pleased to have been here tonight to hear you. I learned a lot. And I was pleased that you said something about the participation of women and the leadership, in particular, of women. And I just wonder if you could maybe say a little bit more about that, but also to say something about where we can learn more about it, and particularly some of the women the individual women who have played roles.
And I want to really emphasize this. What caught my attention, or what impressed me the most in terms of the female leadership in the revolution, is that it wasn't in its own branch. It wasn't, here's the guys, leading, and then here's the female leadership. It was intertwined. I'm calling it that, but I shouldn't. It was just leadership. You'd walk into a group of revolutionary leaders, and one guy would be Muhammad, the other would be Maryam. And they wouldn't overplay the fact that, oh look, woman leader, man leader, you know, it was just, we're just leaders. So it was again, it seemed natural to them, and that was what was very impressive about it. So you see it in all of the youth leadership groups. You see it in the writing on the internet. You see it in the Facebook groups. You also see it in the YouTube videos. As a matter of fact, the most relevant YouTube video that is, again, one of the milestones of this revolution was by Isra Abdel Fattah, a young woman who filmed this very moving YouTube video vlog, and released it before the 25th when most people were still using handles. They were using anonymous names on the internet. She was there with her face, with her name, saying, this is who I am, I'm going into the streets on the 25th. If you're man enough, join me. So she put that challenge to everybody, and she moved a lot of people and helped a lot of people come into the streets, and she's now, again, one of these leaders.
Did you say the name again?
Isra Abdel Fattah. Can you help her with the spelling?
There's a written question from the audience. It's asking about what are the youth groups doing right now to help rebuild Egypt. The comment that follows is that these groups have to continue working to build Egypt and change it to the best. So,
yeah, so you're seeing again, because this, and really one of the headlines, this revolution has no leader. There's no Fidel Castro, there's no Lenin, there's no Robespierre or you know, from the French Revolution, or George Washington. It's just the people. And that was a double-edged sword. Even when the military wanted to deal with us, they didn't know who to talk to, and we didn't know who to tell them to talk to. We had demands, but we just couldn't sit down and talk because it was like everybody. But at the same time, this was a good thing because it meant that it was a revolution of everyone. And you see this now in terms of the youth groups. You see, for example, youth groups develop to clean the streets and to paint the pavements and the electric poles, you know. You see basically a group that comes out to help the wounded. You see a group that comes out to do democracy awareness in the poor neighborhoods. And you see them from the wealthy and educated, you see them from the average, you see them from the poor and less educated. You really see this movement within the people, this is the bridge that we're crossing, to basically do whatever they can. And right now the youth groups are really the moving, sort of the mobilizing, sorry about that, the mobilizing energy of this revolution, and what it keeps the military on its toes, it keeps the media on its, the media has been transformed. Remember when I told you it was pathetic and ridiculous and outrageous? It's changed completely. Overnight. I'm still waiting on Fox News to do the same, but you know, it happened.
question.
Well, I wonder if you indicate that you're a man of two cultures, and I'm selfish, I'm interested in a humanist revolution in the United States as well. And tomorrow, many of us are going by bus at a rally to Indianapolis to support workers' rights. And I wonder the extent to which, since you've returned to Chicago, the spirit of the Egyptian revolution that you described has resonated with activists in the Chicago area and elsewhere in the U.S.
I think it absolutely has. You know, you see signs in the Madison protests, walk like an Egyptian. You see in South Korea balloons, helium balloons being flown over North Korea, you know, do as Egypt did. In Myanmar Republic, which is under occupation, you see people talking about how can we replicate this. It's one of the most unique and one of the greatest revolutions in history, in my opinion, because it sets the new model for what a revolution is. Up until now, that was the French Revolution. The French Revolution, which was bloody, gory, vengeful, etc., is the model for what a revolution is in the Western consciousness. You know, the guillotine, the reign of terror that followed the success of the revolution, right, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what I remind people of when they complain about things going wrong in the aftermath of the Egyptian revolution, because things are not perfect. I remind them to look at history. I mean, this is as good as it gets. Let's just, you know, stay the path. But it was a peaceful revolution. No blood was shed except in self-defense. And we're talking about not 1 million storming the Bastille or whatever number of thousands, but 12 million people in the streets across the country. That's as much as the entire population of some countries around the world. So to have that number, and to have the people be that restrained and that civilized in dealing with each other, in dealing with their opponent, the police and the military, in playing it step by step, in having these organic cells help guide them through, composed of these youth who have no real credibility but through their ingenuity. They've not been appointed by anybody. Was really, that is the transformation of Egypt I'm talking about. Because before, we all thought it was haphazard, it was the city, the country, it was just a disorganized society, and they proved completely otherwise. And they really claimed the ultimate trophy, which is their freedom and a new democracy, which I hope will be the one that we've been dreaming of. So basically, yes, it is a global event, and it is being felt around the globe, and it is being felt in Egypt, the reactions from around the globe. The rallies that were held in Chicago, the rallies that were held around the country, made a big difference in terms of the morale of the people back home. The world knew what they were doing, they stood by them, they were proud of them. Again, this human relationship between us, it isn't about nationality or race or culture or religion. We're all just humans, we all want the same basic things. Believe it or not, these whole pathetic lies that we hear in the media, hear about, they hate us for our freedom, is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. They respect us for our freedoms. They yearn for these freedoms. The freedoms that we take for granted, they are ready to die for. If they hate us, and that is not the case, they actually have more sophistication and nuance in deciphering the complexities of our society and differentiating between our leadership and our people. They respect our people and view our leadership with a healthy amount of suspicion. We don't reciprocate with. We engage in monolithizing. We engage in looking at the other as a single big old block of people. Everybody's a bin Laden, everybody's a Taliban, everybody's the Muslim, the wacko right-wing Muslim brother. I'm not saying we all do that, but we have pundits who lead the discourse who do that. Obviously, we have our intelligentsia, and it's at the upper crust of the world, but I'm talking in general. We have that problem. We see it in the Tea Party, we see it in the rallies. And so, if anything, they want the freedom that we have, but they don't want it to be exported. And they don't believe. They have too much independence and dignity and self-respect to believe that they're incapable of birthing freedom and democracy, that they are forever in need of an export. The Bush doctrine